Sunset Australia would like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the following program.
The Senate's budget blockade sparks fears of interest rate rises. Aborigines claim they've been sold out over Mabo. And Wayne Rainey talks of rebuilding his life after his terrible accident.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Waley.
Good evening. Last night's Senate rejection of key tax bills has sent jitters through the markets, prompting predictions of rises in interest rates. Credit rating agency Moody's also say continued budget uncertainty may put the dollar into a slide. As for those personal income tax cuts, they now appear to be a long-term proposition at best. Peter Harvey has the details.
It was almost inevitable that the Senate would block the wine tax and the second round of sales tax increases, but the concern overseas is the damage to the deficit and to the dollar.
If you did have an effect on the exchange rate, and if the exchange rate changes were excessive, then one could easily assume that there would be a change in interest rate policy.
The Senate's amendment has cost the government $600 million, money it says would have paid for the income tax cuts. But it's not over. The package goes back to the Senate in 10 days with hopes that the Greens may relent a second time around.
That will determine the fate of the deficit, the medium-term deficit reduction strategy and the tax cuts, at least between now and Christmas.
To beat the blocked wine tax, the federal government's now prepared to impose an excise, something it didn't want to do, to raise the $70 million lost. Reserve Bank Governor Bernie Fraser says the Senate's actions are unhelpful and will force the government into alternative ways of revenue raising. There was one agreement today, the ACTU executive endorsing new industrial relations legislation hammered out this week.
It's the best package that can be achieved at this time, and that's what it's about. Political processes are about achieving the best possible reform at a given point in time.
But the package gives non-unionists only limited access to workplace wage deals, despite Mr. Keating's earlier promises of equal treatment.
Unions will always do better than no unions when it comes to enterprise bargaining. And I would urge all of those going into this to seriously think about having a union to represent their interests.
Peter Harvey reporting for Nightline.
Aboriginal leaders have attacked the federal government, saying they've been betrayed over the Mabo issue. Prime Minister Keating says he's surprised by the comments, and further talks are planned with Aboriginal groups next week. Lisa McLean reports.
It was an emotional claim by Aboriginal groups who say they've been sold out to the states over Mabo.
When all it was about was dragging the Aboriginal position down to the gutter level.
They blame the Queensland government and say federal cabinet has supported Premier Goss's proposals and given the states a greater role in dealing with native title claims. But Prime Minister Keating is deeply disappointed.
I don't know why such bad faith is being shown by the Aboriginal leaders.
Over the past two nights, Cabinet has failed to reach an agreement over the Mabo legislation, but the Prime Minister remains optimistic.
A tragic mistake for the Aboriginal community of this country to stay outside this process.
Paul Keating will continue his negotiations with the states. Today he met with New South Wales and Queensland premiers, and tomorrow he'll meet Western Australia's Richard Court. Lisa McLean reporting for Nightline.
In Victoria, a string of towns along the Murray River battling to keep floodwaters out, with the worst yet to come. Nathalia and Echuca are facing record flood levels expected to peak over the weekend. Meanwhile, in the Goulburn Valley, there have been calls for peace after allegations that some farmers are pumping water onto neighbouring properties.
Community spirit has changed to resentment in Victorian towns as neighbours who helped each other in the floods now turn on one another as they try to get rid of the water.
In the situation a lot of people are in, everybody's out for themselves.
Townsfolk accuse farmers as the water levels rise and fall, with each attempt to drive it away from homes and properties. One orchard farmer faces prosecution if he doesn't turn off his pumps, but he says there's too much at stake. It's a different story at Echuca, where waters are still rising. Neighbours here are pitching in, doing all in their powers to save what they can before the floods peak on Monday.
And they all turned up. Didn't ask anyone. Didn't ask. They all just jumped in and come in.
Although confident of success, it's a community already stretched to the limit by one of the worst natural disasters in Victoria's history. Chris Castellari for Nightline.
New South Wales Police have confirmed that the second body found near the southern Highland town of Bowral is Victorian woman Deborah Everest. Her body and that of her boyfriend, James Gibson, were discovered this week. They were located on only a kilometre from where the bodies of murdered British backpackers Joanne Walters and Caroline Clark were found last year. Police are continuing their search of the area for clues to the murders as well as any other bodies amid growing fears that a serial killer is responsible. 24 hours after last night's jail riot at Wakehall in Brisbane's west, it's been discovered another prisoner is missing. Officials now say 6 inmates escaped during the rampage. 3 have been recaptured, but the other 3 are still on the run. However, even more could be on the loose. Jail records were destroyed in a fire, making it difficult to check on all inmates. Several prisoners and warders were injured during the riot. Tanya Blencowe arrived home today. The 11-year-old girl who did such a good job helping to swing the votes Sydney's way for the year 2000 Olympics was given a rousing welcome.
For a Prime Minister and a Premier, they were the most important of presentations, but for Tanya Blencowe, it was the biggest day of her life.
You may be asking why an 11-year-old girl is speaking to you today.
In a polished Sydney performance, Tanya was adjudged the shining light. Today, that smile was still firmly fixed as she arrived home.
Do you feel like a celebrity? I do at the moment.
Bangor Primary School had turned out in force to welcome back their vice-captain, who'd kept her Olympic secret from classmates to the very end. The most nervous viewer on that victorious night, Tanya's mother, Wendy.
I thought it was wonderful. I mean, as a mother, more so than anybody else, I was just worried that she would make a mistake and feel nervous, but she looked very confident.
Mum has vowed it will be school as normal next week.
I've been up in the clouds so far, and I'm just going to try and pull myself down.
Tanya's mission accomplished, she doesn't plan to turn her back on Olympic involvement. As the site takes shape, there are plans to move into retail by the year 2000.
Well, I'd really like to be selling ice creams in the main stadium.
Mark Ferguson for Nightline.
After the break, a warning about ultrasound tests, and Australian peacekeepers return from Cambodia. The use of ultrasound is a source of reassurance for women during pregnancy. But now there's some worrying research from Western Australia that suggests multiple tests could lead to smaller babies. Sheryl Taylor reports.
The Perth doctors set out to see if 5 or more ultrasound tests will be of any benefit to pregnant women. After 3,000 cases, they found the multiple scans offered no advantage at all for healthy babies, but they did notice something else.
In the group of women who had received frequent ultrasound scans, that there was about a 30-gram reduction in birth weight in many of the babies.
However, Professor Newnham stressed the weight difference was minimal, and none of the babies who had multiple scans ended up with health problems. The findings now create a dilemma. They may be significant for the 10% who need several scans. They may also create unnecessary fear in the 90% who only ever have 1 or 2 ultrasounds.
I am concerned about it because I think that, first of all, it could be a chance finding.
The tests also have little application to Australia, where a standard policy recommends only 1 or 2 scans unless problems are suspected, and that's the whole purpose of ultrasound.
I'm on record as saying some years ago that ultrasound was the best thing since sliced bread, and I stand by that.
The results, published in the international medical journal, The Lancet, is intended to advise other countries where ultrasound is widespread.
The challenge for us now in the 90s will be to make sure that we are using these tests at the right gestational age, in the right women, and for the right purpose.
Sheryl Taylor for Nightline.
Peacekeeping is dangerous work, as the Australian troops back from Cambodia know only too well. They were not involved in any major fighting, but had to do their work knowing it was an ever-present possibility. Tomorrow there'll be a big parade in Sydney to welcome 300 of the troops home.
It was a cheer of relief as the first soldiers appeared. After months away, they walked into the arms of loved ones. Hundreds were there to greet them, some for the first time.
I've seen photos of them. That's the first time I've seen it. It's good.
You can mow the lawns now. I don't have to do it.
Our troops witnessed Cambodia's first democratic elections in more than 20 years. Their United Nations mission was also Australia's biggest military operation since the Vietnam War.
It was an eye-opener. It was a learning experience.
Different, definitely different. Makes you really glad to be an Australian.
Australia's role was critically important to the mission.
Tomorrow, the soldiers receive an Australian Service Medal and join others who served in Cambodia in a march through Sydney's streets. Our peacekeeping mission will end next month when the last 150 Australian soldiers return home. Jane Henschke for Nightline.
With more US troops heading to Somalia, President Bill Clinton has appealed to the American public to back the mission. Support for the peacekeeping role in Somalia has dropped dramatically with the deaths of 14 American soldiers this week.
Under intense pressure and criticism, Mr. Clinton said he would get U.S. forces out of Somalia, but not right away, indeed not for another 6 months.
So now we face a choice. Do we leave when the job gets tough, or when the job is well done? Do we invite a return of mass suffering, or do we leave in a way that gives the Somalis a decent chance to survive?
Mr. Clinton said he is sending an additional 1,700 troops to join the roughly 5,000 in Somalia now, and an additional 104 armored vehicles. He's also stationing an aircraft carrier and 3,600 U.S. Marines offshore under U.S. command. The president said the new forces would be trying to do 4 things: protect U.S. forces already there, keep roads and communications open, keep the pressure on those who interfere with relief supplies, and help the Somali people achieve some political harmony. Mr. Clinton said a sudden pullout would destroy U.S. credibility with both friends and enemies.
And all around the world, aggressors, thugs, and terrorists will conclude that the best way to get us to change our policies is to kill our people. It would be open season on Americans.
Mr. Clinton badly needed to shore up support for the Somalia mission in Congress, and after the speech, he seemed to have done so.
I'm convinced that the president understands the importance of our effort there, and also the importance of trying to bring it to an early conclusion.
The president didn't say it explicitly, but other senior officials emphasized one more change. From now on, U.S. forces in Somalia will no longer be intent on the capture of the warlord General Aidid.
Some of Boris Yeltsin's closest aides have criticized the Russian president's handling of this week's battle in the streets of Moscow. They say Yeltsin's headquarters in the Kremlin was understaffed and ill-prepared for the gunfight started by the rebel parliament's militia. And they say Yeltsin was slow to respond, taking several hours to return to the capital from his country home. Even when back in the capital, Yeltsin was reported to be indecisive as the crisis worsened. American intelligence officials have been embarrassed by a group of grandmothers who infiltrated one of their British bases. The US is so secretive about its Menwith Hill facility that it doesn't like to admit the listening post actually exists. But the grannies, determined to rid Harrogate of the base, proved otherwise, videotaping hundreds of illegal tours. Menwith Hill listens in on communications between Britain, America, and the Middle East. Not only did the women gain access to the buildings, but also took secret documents, including a blueprint of the facility. In the American state of Colorado, a tough fisherman has amputated his own leg after it was crushed and trapped under a boulder. 38-year-old William Jaracki, fearing he would die in an approaching storm, severed the leg with a fishing knife using a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. He crawled a kilometre to his truck, then drove to a nearby house for help. His leg was retrieved, but it was too badly damaged to sew back on. The high cost of CDs has been a sore point among music lovers for a long time, but record companies say there are sound reasons behind their pricing policies. Now, though, the cost of compact discs could tumble following a court decision permitting the sale of unauthorised recordings.
Bootlegging, it's been the bane of the music industry for years. Pirate tapes recorded without permission have cost recording companies plenty in lost sales. Now they're set to lose a whole lot more. The giant Sony company, which handles such artists as U2 and Madonna, has lost a federal court action to stop local compact disc wholesaler Apple House Music from selling unauthorised recordings of Michael Jackson concerts in Australia. The decision has prompted Apple House to release dozens of the unauthorised CDs of prominent artists. The tiny company claims the consumer will be the winner because with its CDs priced at less than $20 a piece, its big rivals will be forced to drop their prices to stay competitive. The company's general manager, Noel Forth, maintains what he's doing isn't illegal and that all royalties are being paid. And he gave us a preview of what to expect.
We believe that Australians are paying too much for their compact discs and that the average price should come down. Now, our price of $19.95 is more representative of the sort of price that we believe should be paid.
Most music lovers would undoubtedly agree, but Apple House says it's expecting more lawsuits next week.
In a moment, our world focus tonight. What future for Russia? The Russian people are still coming to grips with the events and aftermath of an astounding week in Moscow. They saw the showdown between President Boris Yeltsin and the rebellious parliament turn from a war of words to a bloody fight at the Russian White House. Yeltsin has portrayed himself as the champion of democracy, promising elections in December. But on a day when Russians were burying their dead, there are worries that Yeltsin will be reluctant to share his newfound power. For many, the signs are bad. Continued censorship and his sacking today of the highest court in the land. In tonight's World Focus, James Mates looks at the future for Russia now that the last remnants of communism have been stamped out.
The gun's now ceremonial, the nation in mourning. A day to bury the dead, a day most Russians hope for reconciliation. President Yeltsin said of those who died that whatever their opinions, they are all the children of Russia. But will ordinary Russians think that the price in young lives has been worth paying? Perhaps, but only if they believe these people died for democracy, not just to keep their president in power. Already Yeltsin's critics are warning them, the man is no Democrat.
Прийти к тому, что закрыть, вот сразу захлопнуть газеты.
Closing newspapers is too much. He already controls the television and radio. This is serious. This isn't why we started the reforms.
The flag on the White House flew at half-mast all day. There was no sense of euphoria among the Russians who came to look. They are being warned their country is about to embark on a whole new stage of reform.
It is a decisive moment. Peaceful coexistence with communist legacy is over. And we are ready to make another reformist breakthrough.
Twice in a little over 2 years, Moscow's White House has become a battleground. The first time Yeltsin defended it, the second he stormed it. He thought back in 1991 he'd defeated communism. This time he does seem to have an opportunity to ensure that it never rises again. His supporters are urging him to start on the land. Land reform has hardly begun. Most farms are still collectives. All previous attempts to allow people to own property were blocked by hardliners in Parliament. They've made more progress privatizing industry, but huge sums are still being spent subsidizing firms to make products that nobody wants, either in Russia or the West. In the past, Yeltsin has been able to blame the lack of progress on obstruction from Parliament. In future, the buck will stop with him. The one cloud on the horizon is the fear that the military, having once stepped in to save Yeltsin, will now be reluctant to give up the limelight. Yeltsin's defense minister, Pavel Grochov, this morning made a well-publicized visit to thank the men who'd stormed the White House. But Yeltsin is in their debt, and they may want more than a thank you. One of the reformers from the Gorbachev era recognizes the generals may want more power.
All democracy side of our society is worrying about this.
Do you think the generals want to get involved in politics in this country?
Some of them yes, some of them no.
Public prayers were said for peace in churches and cathedrals throughout the city this morning. It is easy to forget just how far Russia has traveled already. Even this was forbidden just a few years ago. But many Russians still lie gravely wounded. The country itself is still bitterly divided. Its masters, now unchallenged, have destroyed the old regime. But they must become healers if the country is to take more faltering steps towards their vision of democracy.
And still to come tonight, the latest finance and weather, and the battle of paralysed motorcycle racer Wayne Rainey. To sport now, it's been a disappointing day for the Australians at the Indoor Tennis Championships. Doubles top seeds Mark Woodford and Todd Woodbridge bowed out to German pair Ronce and Riemann. Woodford also lost his singles quarter-final to Czech Peter Korda. South Africa's Wayne Ferreira is through to the semis after his victory over Jonathan Cantor. And tonight, defending champion Goran Ivanisevic also moved through with an easy win over Michael Pernfors. In Sydney today, the Nine Network and the Australian Rugby League agreed to a new 7-year deal, giving the network exclusive rights to the sport until the year 2000. The agreement means Nine will continue its premiership and state of origin coverage, while international matches also return to the network. Well, we've seen so many Grand Prix motorcycle crashes where the rider gets up and walks away that we've grown to think they're almost impervious to damage or injury. 4 weeks ago, American Wayne Rainey crashed in what seemed like just another spill, but he's still paralysed from the waist down. This report from Tim Sheridan.
Sitting up for the first time, Wayne Rainey recalled clearly what happened a dozen or so laps from his 4th world title.
It was just a big pop. I remember feeling just a big pop in my back. So the first thing I tried to do was get up. And I've always tried to do that whenever I crash, just get up, because I feel if I can get up, I'm okay. But I couldn't get up.
The impact of Rainey's bike had smashed his spine, but it was a few days before his wife Shay told him he'd never walk again.
You know, I'm not bitter at all about it, and I'm glad that I did it racing motorcycles.
That attitude was what struck Rainey's friend, Darrell Eastlake.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, I sat there looking at him and we all had tears in our eyes, and he's saying, you know, God saved me, I can move my arms, I'll learn to adapt.
Rainey says the last month has taught him more about racing than his whole career. He'd become inflexible about the need to win.
And I put myself in a situation that I didn't need to be in. You know, I should have told myself now, looking back, it was okay to get 2nd or 3rd, but I had to win.
Always popular here, the 32-year-old has received more than 100,000 messages from Australia.
Their cards have been always positive, and I've been really fortunate that the Australians have gotten behind me so much, and I really appreciate that from them.
There'll be more with Wayne Rainey on Sports Sunday, which starts at 5 p.m. this week. Tim Sheridan, Nightline.
In finance news, the Australian share market gained another 3 points today, making a total rise of 50 points for the week. In Tokyo, the Nikkei rose 113 points. In London tonight, the FT 100 is 4 points up in morning trading. Gold is up slightly to $357.75 an ounce US. And in European trading tonight, the Australian dollar is buying 65.46 US cents, 1.06 Deutschmarks, 68 yen and 42p. The national weather, and there's a low-pressure trough over the centre of the continent and a series of cold fronts south of the Bight. The forecast's an early shower in Darwin, fine in Brisbane, a late change in Sydney, fine in Canberra, showers in Melbourne and Adelaide, colder, windy conditions and showers in Hobart, and another fine day in Perth. To finish tonight, the work of one of the world's most celebrated dancers and choreographers, Agnes de Mille, who's died in New York at the age of 88. A niece of movie director Cecil B. DeMille, she was credited with creating the dance style which went on to dominate the big Broadway shows and Hollywood musicals like Oklahoma. Good night.
This program was proudly brought to you by Ansett Australia.